I was walking toward conference room 4B when I saw my name crossed out on the attendee list. Not grayed out. Not moved to optional. Crossed out. A single black line through Lory Jasons, strategic planning lead. My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral. The quarterly strategy meeting started in 10 minutes, and I'd spent 3 weeks preparing my market analysis. 3 weeks of late nights at my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts and sticky notes, building a comprehensive picture of what European expansion would actually require. The conference room door stood open. Inside, I could see the long table already set with leather portfolios at each seat, the Starway Technologies logo embossed in gold on each cover. Someone had arranged fresh flowers in the center, white lilies that filled the space with their heavy, almost funeral scent. The presentation screen glowed at the far end, waiting for the deck that would shape the company's next 5 years. Philip Winters, our VP of Operations, stood near the door with his tablet, scrolling through something with that tight-lipped expression he wore when he'd already made up his mind. His suit was perfectly pressed, his tie knotted with geometric precision. He had the kind of posture that broadcast authority, shoulders back, chin slightly elevated, eyes that assessed rather than engaged. I approached him directly, my footsteps measured and deliberate. "Philip, I noticed my name was removed from today's session. Was there a scheduling conflict I missed?" He didn't look up immediately. The seconds stretched out, each one calculated to remind me of the power dynamic at play. When he finally did meet my gaze, his eyes were cold, not angry, but something worse. Dismissive. "You question authority too much, Lory." His voice was low but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "The leadership team needs alignment right now, not dissent. We can't have someone derailing important conversations with endless challenges. This expansion is too critical for second-guessing." The words hung between us like smoke. Around us, other executives filtered past, pretending not to notice the confrontation. Stephanie Wong from marketing suddenly needed to adjust her laptop bag, her eyes fixed on the floor. Terrence Hall from product development discovered something fascinating on his phone screen. Some glanced sideways with expressions I couldn't quite read, sympathy, perhaps, or relief that they weren't the ones being singled out. I felt heat rising in my chest, the familiar surge of frustration and anger that came whenever competence was mistaken for insubordination. My hands wanted to clench into fists. My mouth wanted to unleash 12 years of accumulated responses to this exact type of dismissal. But I'd learned something valuable over my tenure at Starway Technologies: emotional reactions are remembered longer than rational arguments. People forget the substance of what you said, but they never forget how you made them feel, or how you looked when you lost control. "Understood," I said quietly, forcing my voice to remain level and professional. "I'll return to my office." I walked out calmly, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floors with a steady rhythm that belied the storm inside me. Past the open workspace where junior analysts looked up from their monitors with curious expressions. Past the break room where someone was heating up lunch that smelled like garlic and ginger. Past the motivational posters about innovation and collaboration that suddenly felt like bitter jokes. I didn't slam doors. I didn't fire off heated emails to HR. I simply left, maintaining the same measured pace I'd use for any other walk through the building. Back at my desk, I stared at the 3-inch binder I'd compiled: comprehensive competitor analysis, market trend projections, risk assessments for the proposed expansion into the European market. Hours of work. Dozens of data points. Interviews with 7 different consultants who specialized in international expansion. Charts showing currency fluctuation impacts. Timelines accounting for regulatory approval processes. All the questions I would have raised, meticulously researched and documented with the kind of thoroughness that had built my reputation. The binder's cover was blue, a color I'd chosen deliberately because studies showed it was associated with trust and reliability. Inside, each section was tabbed with color-coded labels. Green for opportunities. Yellow for cautions. Red for critical risks. The red section was significantly thicker than the others. "You question authority too much." The phrase cycled through my mind as I closed the binder and slid it into my drawer, hearing the metal runner scrape softly. I noticed my hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of containing everything I hadn't said. Everything I still wanted to say. I pulled up my email and typed a brief message to my team: strategy meeting proceeding without my input. Continue with current project priorities. I'll brief you on any relevant outcomes later. I hit send, then sat there watching the autumn clouds drift across the skyline through my office window, wondering how many other voices had been silenced in conference rooms across the corporate world. I came to Starway Technologies straight out of graduate school, eager and idealistic, convinced that smart analysis and hard work were all you needed to succeed. The company was smaller then, still nimble, still hungry. We occupied just 2 floors of this building, and you could walk the entire office in 5 minutes. We made enterprise software solutions for supply chain management, and we were good at it. Really good. We'd carved out a niche serving mid-sized manufacturers, solving complex logistics problems that bigger companies overlooked. I started as a junior analyst, working under Frederick Lawson, a patient mentor who taught me that data tells stories if you learn to listen properly. He'd sit beside me at my cramped desk, pointing at spreadsheets, showing me how to see patterns in what looked like chaos. Numbers don't lie, he'd say, but they also don't volunteer the truth. You have to ask them the right questions. Those early years were intoxicating. Decisions happened in conference rooms where everyone's voice mattered, regardless of title or tenure. I remember proposing a complete overhaul of our pricing model during my second year, a suggestion that should have been far above my pay grade, and having the CEO actually implement it after 3 weeks of rigorous testing. Somewhere along that climb through the ranks, I developed a reputation. Some called me thorough. Others called me difficult. A few called me brilliant but exhausting. I preferred to think of myself as someone who asked the questions that needed asking, even when they made people uncomfortable. The kind of questions that exposed flawed assumptions before they became expensive mistakes. Especially when they made people uncomfortable. Philip Winters joined Starway 3 years ago, brought in to scale operations as we prepared for aggressive expansion. The company had grown. We now occupied 7 floors. The intimate culture had given way to org charts and hierarchy. He came from TechCore Industries, a larger firm, one of those corporate behemoths where process mattered more than innovation, where hierarchy was gospel and questioning your superiors was seen as career suicide. He arrived with an impressive resume, a confident handshake, and a management philosophy built on command and control. His first all-hands presentation included the phrase "execute with precision" no fewer than 12 times. The executive team saw him as the disciplined operator we needed to grow from a scrappy mid-sized company into an industry leader. He and I clashed from the start. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a steady friction, like tectonic plates grinding against each other beneath the surface, building pressure that everyone could feel but nobody wanted to acknowledge. In meetings, I'd raise concerns about timelines based on past project data. He'd dismiss them as pessimism, suggesting I lacked the vision to see what was possible. I'd point out resource constraints, noting specific teams already operating at capacity. He'd call it a fixed mindset, insisting that great leaders find ways to do more with less. I'd suggest alternative approaches based on data from similar initiatives at competitor companies. He'd accuse me of undermining leadership, of sending mixed messages to teams that needed clear direction. The truth was simpler than either of us wanted to admit: we saw the world differently. He saw organizational charts and reporting structures, clear lines of authority flowing downward. I saw systems and dependencies and the 1,000 small things that could unravel a plan, the unspoken assumptions, the optimistic timelines, the resource conflicts that spreadsheets never quite captured. After my exclusion from the strategy meeting, I went about my work with deliberate focus. I updated my project trackers, each status indicator carefully chosen to reflect reality without editorial comment. I responded to emails within the hour, keeping my tone helpful and professional. I mentored my team members, holding our regular one-on-ones in the small conference room with the whiteboard that never quite erased cleanly. I did everything I was supposed to do, maintaining the same high standards that had earned me 3 consecutive performance bonuses. Just without the strategic input I previously provided. If they wanted alignment over analysis, they'd get exactly what they asked for. I would be the perfect organizational citizen, executing flawlessly within my defined boundaries while letting others navigate the strategic complexities they'd claimed not to need my help with. The strategy meeting lasted 4 hours. I heard about it from Carla Martinez, my counterpart in the finance division, who cornered me by the coffee station the next morning. She had that carefully constructed casual expression people wear when they're about to deliver uncomfortable news but want to pretend it's just light conversation. "You weren't there," she said, not quite making it a question. She was holding one of those oversized mugs that claimed to be motivational, this one declaring I turn coffee into spreadsheets. Philip thought it best if I sat this one out. She winced, genuine sympathy crossing her features. Carla had been at Starway longer than I had weathered 3 regime changes and countless strategic pivots. She'd watched promising careers derailed by politics and seen good ideas die in conference rooms because someone with authority preferred their own inferior approach. She knew how to read the political weather. They're moving forward with the European expansion, she said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. The morning crowd was thick, people grabbing coffee before their 9 o'clock meetings, the espresso machine hissing and gurgling. Full commitment. 18-month timeline. Philip convinced everyone it's the right move to establish dominance before competitors catch up. He had slides showing projected market share that made it look like we'd capture 30% of the European market within 2 years. I sipped my coffee, which had gone lukewarm while I'd been caught in a conversation with someone from IT about server maintenance schedules. The bitter taste matched my mood. What's the resource allocation looking like? Aggressive. They're pulling people from existing projects, redirecting nearly 40% of the development budget. Some teams are losing their top performers to the expansion initiative. Launch target is next fall, with 3 major cities as initial deployment sites: London, Berlin, and Amsterdam. They're talking about opening physical offices in all 3 locations. I thought about my binder, still sitting in my desk drawer. I thought about the section on page 47 that detailed the regulatory complexities of data privacy laws across different European jurisdictions, noting that GDPR was just the baseline. Individual countries had additional requirements that could significantly impact our architecture. The part on page 63 about the infrastructure investments required to meet compliance standards, not just technical requirements, but ongoing audit obligations that would need dedicated staff. The analysis on page 92 showing how our current customer support model, built around US time zones and English language service, would collapse under the weight of multilingual, multi-time zone demands without significant scaling. Did anyone raise concerns about execution risk? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it confirmed. Carla's silence was answer enough. Then, quietly, Stephanie started to ask about the implementation timeline for data residency requirements, but Philip cut her off. Said we'd work out operational details during execution phase. He told everyone the meeting was focused on strategic vision, not tactical obstacles. Several people nodded like that made perfect sense. Strategic vision without tactical reality. It was like designing a beautiful bridge without considering whether the materials could actually support the load. I kept my head down. I focused on my existing portfolio, the North American accounts that were actually generating revenue, the product development roadmaps that our engineering teams depended on, the quarterly reviews that kept our current operations running smoothly. I did good work. Solid work. The kind of work that doesn't make headlines or earn standing ovations in all-hands meetings but keeps organizations running, keeps customers satisfied, keeps revenue flowing. My office became a quiet refuge. I brought in a small plant, a succulent that required minimal care but added life to the space. I kept my door open during work hours, available but not intrusive. I arrived early and left late, my car often one of the last in the parking garage. My team noticed the shift. During our weekly check-in, Yuki Tanaka, one of my senior analysts who'd been with me for 4 years, asked the question everyone was thinking but only she was brave enough to voice. Are you okay? You seem different. Quieter. Like you're holding something back. We were sitting in conference room 2C, the small one with the window that overlooked the courtyard where employees ate lunch on nice days. Today it was empty, leaves skittering across the concrete in the October wind. I considered my response carefully, aware that what I said would filter through the team and potentially reach ears beyond this room. I'm adapting to organizational priorities. Sometimes that means stepping back from strategic conversations and focusing on execution. It doesn't mean I care less about the work or about this team. It just means I'm being strategic about where I invest my energy. She frowned, clearly unconvinced but perceptive enough to read between the lines. Good analysts know when to let data speak and when to let silence do the work. She simply nodded and moved the conversation to her current project analyzing customer retention patterns in the Midwest region. The days accumulated with the slow weight of inevitability. The European expansion project gained momentum like a boulder rolling downhill, impressive in its power, concerning in its trajectory. Philip held weekly update meetings that I wasn't invited to, sessions where timelines were discussed and milestones celebrated with catered lunches. Org charts were redrawn with new reporting structures, printed on glossy paper and distributed at all-hands meetings. Budgets were reallocated, pulling funding from proven initiatives to fuel the expansion dream. Press releases were drafted announcing Starway's bold move into new markets, complete with quotes from our CEO about vision and innovation and capturing opportunity. From my position on the periphery, I watched it unfold with a strange mixture of vindication and dread. I knew what was coming. Not the specifics, perhaps, but the shape of it. The contours of the failure that was being built with such confidence and enthusiasm. You don't spend 12 years building expertise in strategic implementation just to forget everything when someone removes you from a meeting. You don't lose your ability to recognize warning signs just because people stop asking for your opinion. The cracks started showing in week 7. I heard about it first from Orlando Briggs, the director of implementation services, a methodical man who'd built his reputation on delivering complex projects on time and on budget. He stopped by my office late on a Friday afternoon, looking haggard, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too many late nights and not enough solutions. His usually crisp button-down shirt was wrinkled, and he carried a laptop covered in sticky notes, the kind of visual chaos that only appears when someone's drowning in problems. "I need your input on something," he said, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet office. Most people had already left for the weekend. Unofficially. The word hung heavy between us. Unofficially meant he was here without Philip's knowledge or approval. Unofficially meant whatever we discussed couldn't be documented or acknowledged. Unofficially meant the project was in trouble deep enough that people were willing to risk political capital to find solutions. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "What's going on?" "The European deployment architecture. We're hitting walls we didn't anticipate. Data residency requirements are way more complex than the initial assessment suggested, and by initial assessment, I mean the consultant report that Philip commissioned from a firm that apparently specializes in telling clients what they want to hear. We're looking at having to completely rebuild our hosting infrastructure in multiple regions, each with different technical requirements and compliance certifications. And the timeline." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Lory, the timeline doesn't account for any of this. Not even close." I opened my laptop and pulled up my old analysis. The one from the binder. The one no one had wanted to hear. The document that had essentially cost me my seat at the strategy table. "Pages 47 through 52, I said, turning the screen toward him. "GDPR compliance alone requires infrastructure that we don't currently have, dedicated servers in EU territories, with specific security certifications that take 4 to 6 months to obtain. Add in country-specific requirements for Germany's Federal Data Protection Act, France's CNIL regulations, and the Nordic countries' additional privacy standards, and you're looking at a minimum 18-month implementation just for the technical foundation. That's before you even begin deploying the actual application." Orlando's face went pale as he scanned the document, his eyes moving rapidly across the detailed breakdown of requirements, timelines, and dependencies. I watched him reach the section on certification processes, then the part about vendor partnerships, then the cost estimates that were roughly triple what had been budgeted. "This is exactly what we're discovering," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every single thing you documented here. The German data protection authorities want extensive documentation we haven't started preparing. The hosting providers we contracted with don't actually have the certifications they claimed. It's a nightmare. Why wasn't this part of the planning discussion?" I met his eyes steadily, letting the question sit between us for a moment. "It was supposed to be. I wasn't in the room to present it." He sat back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "They just plowed ahead without considering any of this. They wanted alignment," I said simply. "They got it." Week 9 brought the second wave of problems, and this time they hit closer to the human element. The hiring push for multilingual support staff revealed that our compensation packages weren't competitive in European markets. We based our salary ranges on US market rates with a simple cost of living adjustment, failing to account for different expectations. Our initial job postings attracted exactly 3 qualified candidates across all 3 cities. None accepted our offers. The vendor partnerships we'd assumed would transfer smoothly from North American operations hit regulatory barriers. Our primary payment processing provider didn't have licenses to operate in 2 of our target countries. Our cloud infrastructure partner needed 6 months and significant legal review to extend services. Our data analytics tools suddenly faced questions about whether they complied with European privacy standards. Each problem on its own was manageable. A delay here, a workaround there, a budget adjustment to cover unexpected costs. Together, they formed a web of dependencies that threatened to collapse the entire timeline like a house of cards built on a shaky foundation. I started getting more visits from colleagues. Quiet conversations behind closed doors. People asking if I'd looked at certain aspects of the project, carefully avoiding any suggestion that they were going around Philip's authority structure. Stephanie from marketing wanted to discuss brand positioning in markets we hadn't researched. Terrence from product development needed input on feature priorities when our roadmap had been built around American user preferences. I helped where I could, offering insights and connecting people with resources. But I didn't volunteer to take a larger role. That wasn't my call to make. I'd been explicitly told my input wasn't wanted. You question authority too much. The phrase had become my shield and my exile. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon, 73 days after I'd been excluded from the strategy meeting. I was reviewing quarterly performance metrics, preparing a report on North American customer retention. The data showed our core business remained strong despite the resource drain. Outside my window, storm clouds were gathering over the city, turning the afternoon light gray and ominous. Then I heard rapid footsteps in the hallway, not the usual measured pace of professionals navigating an office, but the urgent stride of someone who'd abandoned pretense of calm. My door flew open hard enough to bounce against the wall, the handle leaving a small dent in the drywall. Philip Winters stood in the doorway, his face flushed, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled in a way I'd never seen. His tie was loosened and pulled slightly to one side. His shirt sleeves were rolled up unevenly, one higher than the other. There was a coffee stain on his collar. His eyes had a wild quality, the look of someone who'd just watched their carefully constructed reality collapse. "Why did no one challenge the bad plan?" he shouted. The accusation hung in the air between us, raw and desperate. Behind him, several colleagues had stopped in the hallway, drawn by the commotion like witnesses to an accident. I could see their faces, shock, curiosity, carefully masked satisfaction from those who'd watched my exclusion with disapproval. Stephanie looked stricken. Terrence's expression was carefully neutral. Orlando stood further back, arms crossed. I stood slowly, keeping my movements measured and deliberate. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, but my voice, when I spoke, was perfectly calm, the kind of calm that comes from having known this moment was inevitable. "I wasn't in the room, Philip. Remember?" His jaw clenched, tendons standing out in his neck. "The European expansion is a disaster. Complete disaster. We're hemorrhaging budget, 60% of allocated funds gone, and we haven't launched anywhere. The timeline is impossible. Every single assumption we made is wrong. The board has questions we can't answer, and I'm standing in front of them tomorrow trying to explain how we got here." I walked around my desk, maintaining professional distance but holding my ground. Those concerns were documented extensively. 3 weeks before the strategy meeting. I was prepared to present them. "You should have," he stopped himself, the realization hitting him mid-sentence. His shoulders sagged slightly, some of the anger draining away. "You should have." "I should have what?" I asked quietly. Forced my way into a meeting I was explicitly excluded from? Sent unsolicited analysis to people who made it clear they didn't want my input? Challenged authority, even more? The hallway had gone completely quiet. Our audience was no longer pretending not to watch. Philip's voice, when he spoke again, was hoarse. "The board wants a full forensic review. They want to know how we committed $140 million to a project that's fundamentally flawed." I felt a flicker of sympathy for him then. Not because he'd been wrong, he had been, spectacularly, but because I understood the weight of responsibility. "I have documentation," I said. "Complete analysis of the risks we're now encountering. It won't undo the damage, but it might help explain how we got here and what's needed to recover." He looked at me for a long moment. "Why would you help? After I..." "Because this isn't about you and me," I interrupted. It's about the 400 people who work here. The clients who depend on us. The product we've spent years building. I don't help to make you look good, Philip. I help because Starway deserves better than watching this collapse. The board meeting the next day was brutal. I wasn't there for most of it, but I provided my analysis, including the original presentation I'd prepared for the strategy meeting. Every concern I'd raised. Every risk I'd identified. Every alternative approach I'd recommended. Carla, who was in the room, told me later the silence after my analysis was presented had been deafening. Board members passed the document between them, reading sections aloud, asking increasingly pointed questions. The documentation was damning in its prescience. 3 months of preventable problems, laid out with uncomfortable clarity. Philip kept his position, but his authority was significantly curtailed. The European expansion was put on hold pending a complete strategic reassessment. A task force was formed, one that I was very much invited to join, to determine whether the project could be salvaged. The organizational reshuffling that followed was swift. New checks and balances. New decision-making protocols. New emphasis on cross-functional input before major strategic commitments. I watched it all with mixed feelings. Vindication is supposed to feel good, isn't it? But mostly I felt tired. Tired of the waste. Tired of watching smart people make avoidable mistakes because they confused questioning with disloyalty. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Philip asked to meet with me privately. We sat in a small conference room with glass walls overlooking the city. Rain streaked the windows, turning the afternoon light soft and gray. The weather matched the mood, somber, reflective. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. I made a significant error in judgment. Multiple errors, actually. I waited, letting him continue. I thought alignment meant everyone agreeing with me. I thought questioning decisions meant lacking commitment. I was wrong. And that mistake cost the company, cost people's jobs, their projects, their trust, because I was too focused on asserting control to recognize the value of dissent. Dissent isn't the same as disloyalty, I said carefully. Good questions make plans stronger. They expose assumptions. They force us to think through consequences before we're committed. He nodded slowly. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. But I am asking if we can find a way to work together going forward. The board has made it clear that major strategic decisions need broader input. They've suggested, strongly suggested, that you take on a more formal advisory role in enterprise planning. I considered the offer carefully. Not just the title or the role itself, but what it represented. A recognition that organizations need people who ask uncomfortable questions. That hierarchy and expertise aren't the same thing. That sometimes the most valuable voice is the one willing to say, wait, have we thought about this? I'll do it, I said. But on one condition. Name it. Never again exclude someone from a conversation because they challenge assumptions. If you can't handle being questioned, you shouldn't be making decisions that affect this many people. He extended his hand across the table. Deal. We shook on it, and I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not even trust, not yet. But perhaps the beginning of mutual respect. The recognition that we both wanted the same thing, a stronger, smarter, more resilient organization.